Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are tackling a seriously critical skill for lead auditors, mastering and translating ISO terminology. We're going to see exactly how building an accurate audit reference glossary can completely transform the way you assess environmental management systems. Okay, let's dive into this. Listen, if you spent any time at all out in the field as a lead auditor, you have absolutely felt this professional pain point. Have you ever written up a nonconformity only to spend, I don't know, an hour arguing with the auditee because their definition of a specific word didn't match yours? Flawed audits caused by terminology traps are incredibly common, and honestly, they can completely undermine the credibility of your entire assessment. To fix that exact issue, here is our game plan for today. First, we'll look at the audit terminology trap, then the high-level structure, followed by comparing key ISO definitions. After that, we'll hit supporting standards 14004 and 1911. And finally, we'll actually build your own reference glossary. Simple as that. All right, section 1, the audit terminology trap, and why words are literally the architecture of an audit. You know, terminology in these ISO standards, it really isn't just semantics. It completely defines your audit scope. There's this fantastic quote from the source material: language defines interpretation, and interpretation influences compliance outcomes. Think about that. One single misunderstood word, like what an environmental aspect truly means, can lead to massive compliance gaps just being completely overlooked during an audit. So, what actually happens when organizations fall into this trap? Well, you get what's called a terminology nonconformance. This happens when an organization uses legacy documentation or some mixed up internal vocabulary that just completely clashes with standardized ISO definitions. Imagine a company borrowing language from a 20-year-old safety manual and trying to jam it into a brand new environmental framework. It creates massive, hidden compliance risks across their entire integrated management system. Moving right along to section 2, the high-level structure. It's a shared baseline, but with very different dialects. Okay, so for environmental audits, your absolute ground zero is ISO 14001:2026, specifically Clause 3.1. And look, this clause isn't just a basic glossary. No, it is the definitional foundation. It establishes uniform interpretation globally. Before you even think about evaluating any other standard, you've got to anchor yourself right here to prevent subjective, totally inconsistent audit conclusions. But of course, here's where it gets a bit tricky, right? ISO standards use Annex SL, which gives us a harmonized structure. You can think of this as the shared grammar between ISO 14001 for environment, 9001 for quality, and 45001 for safety. But while they speak the exact same structural language, they have vastly different domain-specific dialects. The terminology pivots wildly depending on whether your focus is ecological, market-driven, or worker safety-oriented. Which brings us perfectly to section 3, comparing key ISO definitions. Time to build out your translator matrix. Let's consider the concept of context. Honestly, think of this term as your Rosetta Stone. In 14001, context is all about ecological systems, climate, and sustainability. But pivot over to 9001, and suddenly it means market conditions and competitive positioning. And in 45001, it's workplace hazards. If you accidentally use the quality definition of context during an environmental audit, boom, your scope is instantly broken. Now let's look at interested parties. The audience you need to engage with radically changes depending on the dialect. An environmental auditor using 14001 has to look at regulators, local communities, maybe environmental advocacy groups. But if you're under 9001, you're laser-focused on customers and suppliers. Under 45001, those interested parties are the workers, unions, and health authorities. The definition literally dictates exactly who you need to interview. And, oh man, then there's risk. Risk-based thinking is absolutely foundational across all modern ISOs, but it pivots sharply. In our 14001 environment, risk means pollution, resource depletion, climate exposure. Right? It is not about defective products or customer dissatisfaction like in 9091, and it's definitely not about physical injuries like in 45001. As a lead auditor, you've got to constantly reel it back and anchor to that Clause 3.1 environmental focus. All right, on to Section 4, Supporting Standards 1404 and 1911, or how we bring these static definitions to life. Think of ISO 14001 Clause 3.1 as the raw, unfiltered terminology. It basically sets your conceptual boundaries. Now, ISO 14004 acts as the crucial bridge.
It provides the actual practical guidance and implementation instructions. So, for example, 14001 might define organization and control, but 14004 translates those abstract ideas into structured, real-world frameworks for how you actually manage outsourced activities and those complex supply chains. And then we have ISO 1911, which is, frankly, the ultimate auditor's tool. While 14001 defines parameters, like what documented information actually is, 1911 dictates the auditing principles themselves. It tells you exactly how you must go about verifying the authenticity, the completeness, and the relevance of that documented evidence when you're actually out there doing a site visit.
Let's trace the life cycle of a single term across these three standards just to see this unified system at work. Let's take interested parties again. So ISO 14001 formally defines what an interested party actually is. Then ISO 14004 steps in and guides the organization on how to identify their needs and expectations. Finally, ISO 19011 tells you, the auditor, how to verify the objective audit evidence to prove that the stakeholder engagement really happened. See? They work beautifully together as a completely unified system.
Okay, final stretch. Section 5, building your audit glossary. This is the lead auditor's absolute ultimate toolkit. Now, I want to be clear here. Building a customized Clause 3.1 glossary is not just some boring academic exercise. It is a cognitive discipline tool. As the source material really hammers home, it's a professional necessity. It actively prevents subjective interpretations, ensures your findings are grounded in internationally recognized definitions, and guarantees that your audits are repeatable, whether you're assessing a tech firm in Tokyo or a manufacturing plant in Munich. So how do we actually build this into a practical, everyday workflow? 4 simple steps. Step 1, write down the base ISO 14001 definition. Step 2, add in your 9001 and 45001 variations so you're totally ready for integrated audits. Step 3, map that specific term to your local regulatory frameworks and permits. And Step 4, link it directly to your ISO 19001 evidence requirements. That way, you know exactly what records to ask for before you even walk through the door. And why does all of this matter so much for your daily workflow? Well, having this integrated glossary completely eliminates the ambiguity when you're sitting down to write up a nonconformity. It aligns your cross-functional audit processes, it clearly separates mandatory legal compliance from just voluntary commitments, it enhances how you communicate with regulatory bodies, and it standardizes your reporting across all your integrated management system audits. Honestly, it just makes your audits bulletproof. So, I'm going to leave you with a question to mull over. As you prepare for your very next assessment, is your audit terminology acting as a structural bridge to compliance, or is it a hidden trap just waiting to generate false nonconformities? It's definitely worth thinking about. Review your documentation, build out that reference glossary, and take complete control of your audit narrative. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today to unpack the fascinating architecture of audit language. Keep learning out there, and I'll catch you next time.